Hey guys, and welcome back to the Academy. For this project, we are going to be working on a password protected ticket. And what that's going to do for you is that's going to take you through learning how to build a dynamic project using ERC 1155s. We're also going to go into learning what Soulbound means in terms of NFTs, memberships, event passes, tickets, whatever you want to call it, just making it so that basically a person is unable to sell it to anyone. They're only able to burn the ticket, which we'll get into as well, or send them back to the original owner, which in this case would be the project founder. Also, we will learn the importance of converting strings to bytes 32. This is for gas efficiency and storage. String storage can get actually can get really expensive depending on what chain you're using, and just not as efficient as we'd want it to be. So we'll learn it's a little bit tedious, but it makes your contract a lot more efficient, and we definitely want to have that optimization aspect to it. And then lastly, burning, just kind of going over the general concept when it comes to burning tokens. What does it mean? How can I implement that into your contract? Really important to grasp this concept, because as you start building more and more complex models, more than likely you're going to encounter a model where you're going to want to know how to burn tokens correctly and what that means. So without further ado, let's hop on into it. So what I first want you to do is head on over to a site called wizard.openzeppelin.com. Now, if you weren't aware of this site, OpenZeppelin standard is pretty much the go-to when it comes to building ERC20, which is for fungible tokens, ERC 721s, which are for your non-fungible tokens, your NFTs. ERC 1155 is kind of a blend of both the fungible token and the non-fungible token, but it just kind of makes things a lot simpler. And when you use this, you always know that you are using the most up-to-date version that they have available. You can also do things like you can kind of customize. You can make it, burnable if you want to. You can make it pausable. You can do all that. You can even make it upgradable depending on what standard that you're planning on using. But just a pretty good little starting point for what we want to do with our token, right? So what we're going to do is head on over to remix.ethereum.org. And this is going to be our IDE for most of the projects that we're working on, where it's strictly Solidity code. This will work just fine for you. A little bit down the line in this section, we're going to talk about when I like to use hard hat for my deployments. But generally speaking, like 90 to 95% of the deployments I do are right through Remix. It just makes things very simple. It makes it easy to understand for my clients when I hand the code over to them to help them kind of walk through and let them know like this is what's happening with deployment. So this all should be pretty familiar to you already, but just in case, if not, when you jump into Remix, it looks something like this. You have your contracts folder. When you go to create one, you can just create a new file and you'll have it. I went ahead and created basically a blank copy of boxingticket.soul, which is what we're going to be working on for this project, for the password protected ticket, right? And for the sake of this lesson, I just want to back up and talk a little bit about ERC 1155s and pretty much what they do, right? Just as a quick overview, when it comes to ERC 1155, basically you're implementing this for, it's more likely that you're going to use it for GameFi, but it's also when you want to have an image and you want to have multiple copies. So typically I'll build projects like this, or I'll suggest projects like this to clients when they want to be able to mint a lot of one particular image. The benefit to doing ERC 1155 is just the fact that if I were to do NFTs, or ERC 721, sorry, it's going to be very expensive if I have a collection of, NFT collections. They'll stop at around 10,000, versus with ERC 1155s, it's very easy to, I just had a collection that did 1 million, right? And it's much cheaper because think about fungible tokens and how people do ICOs for billions, if not trillions, of one token. It's the same benefit for ERC 1155. It just has that added bonus of adding in metadata so you can attach an image or something like that. Now, with some of that background out of the way, let's go ahead and get to coding, and let's code our boxing ticket. It's going to be a password protected boxing ticket. It's going to be an ERC 1155. It's going to be ownable. We're going to make it burnable. And we're going to add this special class that will allow us to access some special functions here. So ERC 1155 supply is just going to allow us to check the total supply of each individual ID that we create. That's all that it does. It just makes our job a little bit simpler. Okay, so the very first thing we're going to want to do, now you'll see this class pretty often. Which just kind of helps with errors when you're dealing with big numbers like UINT 256s and addresses. The reason why you're going to want to convert these to strings automatically is a lot of times these numbers are too big to handle. Like your address, if it's not converted immediately to a string, it can cause errors. Okay. And let's name. Let's just call it boxing ticket for now. Oop. And what's going on with this? Oh, so just to get rid of this error, what it's saying is derived contract must override function before token transfer. If I'm not mistaken, I believe this is something that OpenZeppelin tells you to. Where's my override? Mintable. I hope it was right there. It's just this, but I'm not going to make it pausable. And that should go away. Why didn't it go away? Oh, that'll go away in a second. That's because we don't have a constructor yet. Actually, let's do that. So we have our constructor. For those who don't know what a constructor is it's a special function that is set to run upon deployment and no other time. So it runs once upon deployment and that's it. And that's basically all a constructor is, but it gets rid of that error. So now what we need to do, let's give it a symbol. And if I don't give it any marker, just a quick example, anything that's not marked public or anything else is automatically private. So it's the same as if I would have written this. Operator. Public price. So basically what I'm doing is I'm creating some variables. I want there to be an operator, someone other than the owner, if the owner of this contract wanted to provide some flexibility, add another admin. You can call it operator, you can call it admin, it doesn't really matter. Let's do a count. And at this time, we're only going to have one type of NFT, and that's going to be our ticket. If we wanted to have different classes, I could have did something like this. And I could have called it ticket 2, ticket 3, something like that. But for now, we don't need it. And this last one is, we want to make it Soulbound. Perfect. Okay, so let's stop there. What I mean by Soulbound is basically when you soul bind a particular token, what you're saying is the person who mints it owns it and they can't do anything with it. Basically, like they can't sell it, they can't transfer it to anyone else. Now the way I write Soulbound tokens is I make it so that a person can only do a few things with that token. You can send it back to the original owner, or you can burn it, right? So giving them the option of, I can only sell this back to the owner or I can burn it. And the concept for that came from if you were if you had an ownership stake in a company, typically the way they divvy up shares, they can put in stipulations into the operating agreement that says, we have a buyback clause, or we have something where you can only sell this share back to us and we can do an agreed rate or anything like that. So when we're writing these smart contracts, we want to start getting creative and just kind of keeping in mind what a person wants to accomplish with these tokens and how to best implement it. So for the most part, making a soulbound token, you can liken that to making some type of setup where a person has a share in a particular project and they can only do so much with it. Now, with that said, what does it look like to make it soulbound? So to do that, we need to create our transfer function. So this is going to be our first instance of an override. So ERC 1155 has a function called save transfer from. And what the safe transfers basically do is they check to make sure that a particular contract, if it is not like a wallet that a human owns, if it's instead a contract, it checks if that contract can receive ERC 1155s. That's typically where you'll see contract interfaces such as ERC or IERC 1155 receiver, ERC 721 receiver, those classes, because if it's a contract that needs to receive those tokens, if they don't have it, that's where the function will fail. And that's what safe transfer from does for you. So here, and again, what I just basically took that from was the original safe transfer function. Now here's where we switch it up just a little bit. We're going to say if Soulbound if the msg.sender is the owner, and this owner function just comes from ownable, where it's checking the context. So it's running this little function that just checks to see who the owner is. It's nothing that complex. Or operator. Then you can do what you normally do. And that's what super is. So super, whenever you see this keyword, it's do everything that you would have did anyway, basically. It just makes it so you don't have to rewrite the code from the original one. So in this case, the flexibility that I'm giving the owner of the contract in this case is we're going to create a set function or a toggle switch that says, if we want to make it where people can't transfer for this particular period, then we'll have this set to true, and it's set to true by default. Now, if we want to, for some reason, turn that off and just let people sell how they want to, then we can turn that off. And then we don't have to worry about this portion down here. So from there, what we're going to want to do is else. Let's write a require statement. Address, this is the 0 address. Or to owner. And again, super is just do what you would have done already. Okay. And the last else is going to look like this. So it's for if it's soulbound, else do this. Just do what you would have normally done. Okay, pretty straightforward. Also, just a little quick note here. So operator in this instance is likely not going to be, in most instances, your operator is not going to be another human or another wallet address, but it's likely going to be if you were to use another contract to handle, the tickets in this instance, or the NFTs, anything that's going to hold these NFTs and receive them, you're going to want to make them an operator of the contract. And obviously you're going to want to make it something that can actually receive them. But we're going to get more into this when it comes to how to build custom interfaces and just how to make your ecosystem kind of work together, where you have a bunch of different contracts that are playing off of each other. So in this instance, your operator probably isn't going to be another human, although it could be. Now there's one other thing that we have to add, and that is ERC 1155s are a little bit different because they also have the batch transfer. So you have safe transfer from, and you also have safe batch. Batch transfer is just if you want to send like an array of stuff. So you want to send an array of different IDs, then you're able to do that too. The reason why you want to overwrite this as well is you don't want to allow people to exploit the fact that if they go through the back end and try to transfer something, if you didn't override the safe batch transfer from, the issue that you're going to run into is there's no Soulbound restriction on it. So I could go, if I wanted to go around it and only safe transfer from was overridden, then I can just technically go into the contract and just transfer however I want to. So you're going to want to make sure that you override. If you override one thing, just to kind of protect your project, you're going to want to override and make sure everything is soulbound, so everything's tight.